It's February 2009, the day of the trade deadline. The Chicago Bulls are anticipating the imminent acquisition of Sun superstar Amari Stoudemire, and rumors were swirling about who would be in the supposed return to Phoenix. Eyes were drifting towards Drew Gooden, who had been out since late January with a groin injury. The Big Drizzle had been putting up solid numbers since he was acquired at last year's trade deadline, but he was definitely expendable. A trade did come through. The Bulls wanted Stoudemire. They got Brad Miller and John Salmons from the Kings. Gooden and three names I've never seen in my life were shipped to Sacramento in return. Since the merger, there have been 5 Sacramento Kings to average a double-double over the course of their time with the franchise. Chris Webber, who made 5 straight All-NBA teams with the Kings. DeMarcus Cousins, who really doesn't need any introduction. Rajon Rondo, who led the league in assists in his one season in Sacktown. Drew Gooden, and Domantas Sabonis, who has led the league in rebounding since joining the Kings. That's correct. Drew Gooden, otherwise known as the Big Drizzle, the Truth, Rasheed Wallace, or Gooden Plenty, is a member of this vaulted club of Kings players. Issue is, he played a single game for them, and then they showed him the door. This is that story. Drew entered the Kings franchise at a bit of a low point. They had snapped an 8-year sellout streak the season before, and their record today sits at 12-46. They had fired their second-year coach Reggie Tia 6 weeks into the season, and Kenny Nat came in to replace him. Bino Udrih started 72 games this year for the Kings. On top of all that, they were struggling to acquire land for a new stadium, and ownership had begun real talks about moving the team out of Sacramento. In the ultimate Sacramento Kings move, Miller and Salmons were unable to play in their first scheduled contest with Chicago because the Kings didn't schedule and submit Drew Gooden's physical documents in time. The Bulls still won that game, 116-99. Gooden's physical was eventually conducted, and it revealed nothing new. He had a groin injury of indeterminate severity. Nobody knew when he would make his debut, including Gooden. To be fair, Sacramento was 12-46 at the time. There wasn't a real rush to do much of anything. Anyway, it was announced on the 25th that he would be making his debut the next night in Sacramento versus the 22-35 Charlotte Bobcats. In a silly coincidence of fate, the posted attendance for this matchup between the Kings and the Bobcats, which was totaled at 10,439, was the lowest ever attendance in the history of the Sacramento Kings. One of these people, sitting courtside, just so happens to be Michael Jeffrey Jordan. He must have known who was making his Kings debut tonight. As Drew Gooden suited up in the Kings uniform for the first time, he was greeted by a crowd of which the magnitude the city of Sacramento had never seen before, and one of those people just happens to be the GOAT. Go figure, I don't know. Anyway, Bino Udrih injured his ankle 1 minute and 17 seconds into this game, which gave Drew a chance to go to work. He played every minute of the second quarter, finishing the first half with 8 and 7. He would later say that he didn't know any of the plays. He was just out there taking 20-footers and finishing with ease, 2009 style. Down 16, he was on the floor to start the fourth quarter until he felt something tighten up when lunging for a rebound. With 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, Drew Gooden walked off the floor as a Sacramento King for the first and last time. He finished the game with 26 minutes, 12 points, 13 rebounds, 2 assists, and 3 turnovers. Gooden was nowhere to be found during the Kings' next 2 games. Murmurs of a buyout were in the air as the deadline for playoff eligibility was looming and Gooden was just sitting there. Sure enough, hours before the deadline, Gooden and the Kings agreed to a buyout and he was free to sign with another team. He signed with the Spurs some 5 days later. There ends Drew Gooden's double-double streak in Sacramento. I looked through the history of every single team who's had one player play one game with them and have at least 10 points. But most of them are journeymen at the end of their career or young guys at the beginning of their career who still have a chance to make it back to the NBA, so I can't include them. The Cavs, for example, had Dante Jones, but it was the end of a journeyman's career. Raja Bell scored 11 points in his one game for the Warriors in 2010, and then they cut him. Louis King dropped 20 on efficient shooting in his one game with the 76ers, and he still hasn't seen the league since. Omri Casspi was shipped to New Orleans in the DeMarcus Cousins trade, scored 12 points in his one game, and they waived him a few days later. But nobody has dared to do what the Kings did in 2009. They brought in a guy for one game, had him put up a double-double, and then cut him for no gain. It's almost unthinkable. Drew Gooden was 27, the former 4th overall pick, at the peak of his physical powers. He put up 12 and 13 off the bench while injured, and the Kings said no. We're going to pay you to go home and play somewhere else. Certainly, nobody would ever dare to do such a thing again. 4 years later, on April 17, 2013, the morning of Game 82, Rasheed Wallace officially retired from the NBA, and the playoff-bound New York Knicks signed journeyman Earl Barron to their roster in his place. Earl hadn't played basketball in 5 months. Earl started the same day he signed. He played 36 minutes, and he proceeded to bring down 18 rebounds, along with 11 points. Earl would never wear a Knicks uniform again, at least not on the court, and he and Gooden are the only two players to have ever had 10 and 10 and get dropped from their team without playing another game. And guess who's sitting there on the Hawks bench watching Earl dominate? This guy is everywhere!